I was alone in the small office I worked at. Just me and the servers. My job as an IT technician was routine, but sometimes it felt isolating. One night, about a week ago, everything changed. I was focused on maintenance tasks. The fluorescent lights above flickered every now and then, creating a strange atmosphere. I thought it felt normal, but soon, I heard a faint tapping coming from the metal filing cabinets nearby. It was soft at first. I thought maybe the building was settling. I pushed it aside, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Later that week, the tapping came back, louder and more insistent. My heart raced. Every time I tried to ignore it, the noise got louder, almost like it was mocking my anxiety. I glanced around the empty office. Just silence and shadows. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was tired, but the tapping wouldn't stop. It felt like a warning that my computer started flickering, too. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Each flicker seemed to pulse with the tapping sound. I can't explain how, but the more I focused on it, the more I felt something was nearby. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. Every time I turned my head, nothing was there. It made me uncomfortable. I felt cold. I had never felt like that before. As the days turned into nights, the tapping grew bolder, invading my mind like a drumbeat I couldn't shake. The office itself felt like it was watching me. My co-workers didn't notice anything odd, but I didn't mention it to them. What would I say? Did anyone hear tapping at night? I didn't want to sound crazy. One night, while the tapping reached a new level, I looked up from my work. I was exhausted and considered just going home. The flickering lights cast shadows across the walls. I turned toward the sound, heart pounding. I stood there, frozen, half expecting to see something. Then, I heard a voice, quiet and almost a whisper, saying something like, "Let me in." I wasn't sure if it came from the taps or the shadows. My skin prickled. I thought I was alone, but maybe I wasn't. I turned back to my desk, my heart racing. When I looked again, nothing was there. Just silence that I've tried to forget those nights. But I still feel uneasy. What if the taps meant something? What if they were more than just my tired mind playing tricks on me? I still can't understand what happened that week. And maybe, that's the scariest part. The next week, the tapping returned, but this time, it was different. It came with a rhythm, steady like a heartbeat. I sat at my desk, jumping at every sound. The fear was creeping back, a familiar companion I couldn't shake. My manager had asked me to check on some old backups in the storage room. I dreaded the thought of going there, especially alone. Each step toward that dark corner of the office felt like a march into the unknown. The flickering lights barely illuminated my path. Shadows loomed larger than life around the filing cabinets, distorting their forms. As I opened the storage room door, a cold wave hit me, making me shiver. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, scanning the shelves filled with dusty boxes. My eyes were drawn to one in the back. It was out of place, newer than the others, perfectly intact. Curiosity gnawed at me despite the unease clinging to my thoughts. I reached for it, and as my fingers brushed the box, the tapping sound grew louder, echoing in my ears. I hesitated, but a compulsion drove me to lift the box. When I opened it, I found a stack of forgotten photographs. They were black and white, depicting my office building under construction, long before I started working there. Then I noticed something chilling. A figure stood in the background of one photo, partially obscured. The details were unclear, but there was something about the way it angled its head that sent a shiver down my spine. I flipped through more photos, each revealing the same presence lurking, closer in some shots, but always just out of focus. It felt as if the figure was following me, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging my world into darkness. My heart raced. I dropped the box, the photographs spilling across the floor. I stumbled backward, adrenaline kicking in. I fumbled for my phone, the only source of light. When I turned it on, panic formed a knot in my stomach. The unmistakable outline of that shadowy figure now loomed before me, filling the doorway that I couldn't think. I bolted past it, practically tripping through the storage room to the exit. I could have sworn I heard a low chuckle echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the main office area, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breath came in quick gasps, but the shock couldn't mute the tapping. It reverberated beneath my pounding heart, insistent and relentless that I stood there, leaning against the door, but the tapping seemed to seep into my mind like a dark ink blot, reminding me of the photos and the figure. I didn't know what it wanted. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had uncovered something important, something that had been waiting for me to find it, and that's when I realized I had to go back. I had to know more about what was happening. Before I could gather my courage, the lights flickered once again, plunging me into darkness. And then I heard a whisper, close to my ear, saying, "Let me in." I stood frozen by the door, trying to catch my breath. The darkness felt thick around me, closing in, pressing against my skin. "Let me in." The whisper lingered, taunting me. I didn't want to face whatever had emerged from the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, I took a cautious step back toward the storage room door. My heart raced as I faced the source of the tapping. Curiosity and fear fought inside me. I reached for the handle, but my hand shook. "What's wrong with you?" I whispered to myself. Gathering what little courage I had left, I slowly opened the door, peeking into the semi-darkness. The faint glow from my phone illuminated the scattered photographs on the floor. I realized I'd have to go back. I needed to understand the figure in those pictures. I stepped inside, forcing the door shut behind me. The cold air wrapped around me, making my skin crawl. Kneeling, I began to gather the fallen photographs. Most were blurry, but they quickly made the familiar figure stand out even more against its backdrop of construction crews and scaffolding. This time, I noticed something new. In one picture, the figure was standing next to a construction worker, its head tilted in a way that eerily mirrored the worker's pose. Confused, I flipped through the rest, hunting for more anomalies. That's when I saw it. One photograph was dated. It read, March 14, 1989. It's the same date as a tragic accident that had taken place on the site, something I had only overheard in hushed conversations. The tapping continued, but now it sounded different, more urgent, almost like a pleading. "Stop it," I shouted into the stillness, my voice echoing back at me. I gritted my teeth, pushing down a wave of panic. My eyes darted from the floor to the shelves, searching for the shadow again. I needed to leave, but I was frozen, caught between the past and whatever this presence was. Then, to my horror, I noticed something change in the corner of my eye. The figure had moved in the photo. I could have sworn its eyes were darker, more defined, as if they were staring straight into me. Cold dread washed over me. I staggered back, clutching the remaining photographs tightly. A sudden crash echoed from outside the office, loud enough to rattle the cheap fluorescent lights. Every hair on my body stood on end. The tapping was gone, replaced by a building tension outside. I glanced at the door, torn. I needed to know if the whispers were part of the tapping or the sound of something more sinister. But as I moved toward the exit, I heard it again. "Let me in." This time, the voice sounded like it was coming from just behind me. I turned, my breath hitching in my throat. The figure stood there, clearer than before, its outline now solid, dominating the room. My heart pounded as it pointed toward the photographs on the ground. I could hardly process what I was seeing. What was it trying to tell me? That's when everything went dark again. I gasped, my eyes wide, and stumbled backward. The room felt impossibly small, closing in on me as shadows danced at the edges of my vision. I reached behind me blindly until I hit the wall, my palms pressing against the cool surface as I tried to steady myself. Then, the darkness shifted. The figure loomed closer, features becoming sharper even without light. I could make out the line of its jaw, the way its clothes hung slightly loose. It was dressed like the construction workers in the photos, workers who might have been there on that fateful day in 1989. My mind raced, straining to remember every detail about the accident I'd only heard murmurs about. Panic clawed at my chest as I searched for the door. But the figure held its position, and in that frozen instant, a chilling realization settled over me. It wasn't just a ghost, it was an echo of someone lost before the world knew it. "What do you want?" I stammered, desperate for a connection, a response, anything. To my shock, it opened its mouth, but the words came out as a low groan that seemed to wrap around the room like a heavy fog. Then, just as suddenly, it reached out with a hand, elongated fingers pointing toward the far wall, where the remnants of discarded tools leaned. My blood ran cold. Had it been trying to warn me all along? Before I could respond, the lights flickered back on, bathing the room in an unforgiving brightness. In a blink, the figure evaporated, the dread in my stomach twisted violently. I might have thought it had been an illusion, a trick of the mind, but then I noticed something new on the wall. A mark, jagged and deep, scored the paint as if something had raked across it. It splayed out like a clawed handprint, dark against the white surface. I could barely breathe as I crept closer. I placed a tentative finger against it, and the chill from before surged through me. I stumbled back again, my heart racing as I wiped my hand on my pants. The air was thick, heavy with an unspeakable weight. "No, no, no," I whispered to myself, but the words felt empty. That I needed to get out. I wouldn't stay another moment. I turned to the door but hesitated, glancing over my shoulder one last time. The pictures lay scattered like a silent jury, judging my fear. If only I could piece together the connection. As I reached for the door handle, a loud crash erupted from within the storage room, sending a shudder through the floor. I jumped, the sound echoing in my ears. Whatever was in there was restless. My heart pounded in my chest, but I found myself drawn back to the storage room, against my better judgment. The figure had been reaching for something. There had to be more. I opened the door, anxiety buzzing in my veins, and stepped inside. When I saw it, something shiny half buried underneath tools and boxes on the floor. I knelt down, my breath hitching as I reached for it. The metallic glint revealed itself to be a small, silver locket. I opened it to find a photograph, but my blood ran cold again. The face staring back at me was strikingly familiar. I'd seen that face before, not in the worker's picture, but in one of my own family photos. I needed to know the truth, but the rush of confusion only left me feeling unsteady. Who was this person? How was it connected? As I searched for answers, the lights flickered again, and a whisper curled in my ear. "Let me in." Then everything went dark once more. I stumbled to my feet in the deep darkness, fear gripping me like a vice. I could barely see, but I didn't want to risk flicking the lights back on. What if the figure returned? My heart thudded loudly in my chest, a reminder of how alone I felt. The storage room had turned into a cave of shadows, and I was the lone explorer, lost and afraid. I glanced down at the locket still clutched in my hand. My breath hitched as I traced the outline of the photo with my thumb. I had to figure out who that person was. I needed to connect the dots, but the more I thought, the more tangled my mind felt. The whispers from earlier echoed in my ears, "Let me in." Someone wanted something from me. I heard a sound, a faint clinking, like metal shifting on metal. I turned, straining to pierce the darkness with my eyes. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper. No answer came, but the noise continued, growing louder and more insistent. It was coming from an unseen corner beyond the shelves. Against my better judgment, I edged toward the sound, the locket still clutched in my palm. As I neared, my foot caught on something, a loose tool, maybe, and I stumbled, fear spiking through me. I quickly steadied myself, putting my free hand against the wall. That's when I spotted it, a bright flash reflecting off something hard and metallic near the shadowed corner. My pulse quickened. Was it a tool? Or something more ominous? I took a step closer, drawn in by an unseen force. It felt like the air thickened around me, the clinking changed to a soft scraping. Someone or something was moving something around. The chill that spread over me was different this time, it felt alive, almost expectant. I took another cautious step forward, barely daring to breathe, then the lights flickered back to life without warning. I winced as the harsh glow flooded the room, illuminating the space I had just been inching into. My eyes shot to the corner where I had heard the scraping, and my heart dropped. A small toolbox lay open on the ground, but there was no sign of movement or anything unusual. Confused, I knelt and examined the toolbox. Inside was a collection of rusted tools, but something caught my eye. Layered among the debris was another item, a dark, crumpled piece of paper. I reached for it, adrenaline pumping. As I unfolded it, the room felt impossibly still. It was a faded contract, crinkled from age, and at the top, in bold letters, was the name of the construction company involved in the accident. Beneath it were signatures, but the names didn't matter. It was a list of jobs, locations, and dates. My breath hitched again, and I felt the familiar pull of fear creep back in. One stood out. The location referred to the very site where the tragedy had occurred. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted across the far wall. I spun around, heart racing again. I wasn't alone anymore. "Who's there?" I called, feeling my voice tremble. No answer came. Instead, the cold grip of dread settled deep within me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity I had sensed before was back, and it was watching me. Just as my panic surged, the locket slipped from my fingers, clattering to the ground with a sound that echoed in the silent room. I bent down to retrieve it, but when I looked up, I realized I was no longer standing in the storage room. That I was in the shadow of the construction site, enveloped in a mist that seemed to pulse with life. A loud voice called out, urgent, from the fog. "You need to leave now." Then, the silence returned, heavier than ever. The fog wrapped around me like a shroud. I stood there, paralyzed by confusion and fear. The voice had been so clear, yet the mist swallowed it again, leaving only an unsettling echo. I felt the ground beneath me shift, gritty and uneven, as if I might sink into the earth at any moment. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely rising above a whisper. No one answered. Instead, the silence felt alive, and my skin prickled with a warning. I instinctively took a step back, but the ground shifted again, pulling me further into the heart of the site. As I moved, I caught sight of faded signs, still half buried in the dirt. Words flickered in and out of focus, warnings about safety hazards and construction zones. They felt haunting, almost mocking. With every step, I felt more trapped, entangled in whatever had pulled me here. Something glimmered amidst the fog. It caught my eye and seized my breath. I leaned forward, curiosity overtaking my fear. It was the locket, the same one I had just dropped. How had it returned? I reached for it, and as my fingers brushed the cold metal, a surge of images flashed through my mind: faces, lost voices, and cries of despair. Memories that weren't mine. I stifled a gasp. They felt real, too real. I jerked my hand back, my heart racing. The shadows around me started to shift, morphing into indistinct shapes. Unease settled heavily in my stomach. I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath me, and a loud crack echoed through the air. I turned, expecting to see a figure emerging from the mist, but nothing was there. Just the dark, swirling fog and a cacophony of whispers that turned into a mournful wail. "You shouldn't be here," the voice returned, louder this time, and it felt both foreign and familiar. Panic surged within me, and I backed away. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape this nightmarish vision. I could feel the weight of their regret pressing against me. In my haste, I turned to sprint, but my foot caught on something, and I fell hard to the ground. The air rushed out of my lungs as pain flared in my knee. I lay there, gasping, the ground cold and unyielding against my skin. I couldn't look back. I didn't want to see what might emerge from the thick mist, but the whispers grew louder, echoing memories of the accident, muffled cries of warning. "You need to know the truth," they chanted, their voices like a chorus rising in unison. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to shut them out, but they seeped into my thoughts, demanding my attention. "What truth?" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "What do you want from me?" That's when I saw it, a shadow moving through the mist, large and undefined. It stopped, hovering just beyond the reach of my sight. I held my breath, paralyzed by fear as realization washed over me. Whatever this was, it was linked to the tragic accident, and somehow it wanted me to uncover that truth. As the presence grew nearer, the whispering ceased, leaving only an oppressive silence. I felt like prey, caught between the desire to flee and an insatiable curiosity to understand. I needed to find out who was haunting me and why. Then everything went dark. The whispering returned, this time low, almost soothing. I strained to focus, feeling overwhelmingly lost in the depths of the gloom. In that silence, clarity crept in, an inkling of the connection. I wasn't just an observer, I was part of the unfolding story. "Help us," a voice urged softly, pulling at my heartstrings, and then I understood. I had to face whatever awaited me in the darkness. There was no going back now. I blinked, and the darkness faded, but I didn't find the foggy sight I had been in. Instead, I found myself standing in a stark fluorescent-lit office. My breath hitched as I realized I was back at work, but the unease lingered like a phantom. Papers were strewn across the desks, but the office was empty, not a soul in sight. I could hear the hum of machines, just barely, and the clattering of some distant keyboard, echoing in the silence. I rubbed my eyes, disoriented. How had I gone from a nightmarish landscape to my mundane workplace? Had it all been a vivid dream? But the locket in my pocket was a heavy reminder that it felt all too real. I glanced down at the scattered documents and noticed one particular sheet. It was a report on the very accident that haunted my thoughts. My heart raced. How did it end up here? I hesitated, but I had to know more. I reached down and picked it up, my hands trembling. As I scanned the page, a chill ran through me. The names listed were familiar people I recognized from the whispered warnings back in the mist. They had shared that tragic moment with me, and somehow, I felt their presence fill the room. I set the report down quickly as the shadows in the corners of my vision twisted, coming to life. "Help us," a voice pleaded, echoing the words from the darkness. I turned abruptly, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was only the same empty space. Cold dread settled into my gut. I was alone, but somehow not alone. I could feel their urgency pressing against me. "What do you want?" I shouted into the emptiness. My voice bounced off the walls, swallowed by the silence. With each second that passed, I could sense the atmosphere thickening, almost as if the shadows were alive and encroaching on me. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. I jumped, instinctively reaching for my phone. I needed light, something to ground me in reality. The screen lit up, illuminating the report on the desk. But the words began to shift before my eyes. Sentences twisted, letters disarranged, morphing into ominous phrases I couldn't comprehend. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried to step back, but my foot caught again, as if anchored by the darkness. A loud crash echoed from somewhere in the building, and I jerked sharply in its direction. Something was out there, something I couldn't see, yet I could feel it watching me, waiting for my next move. "Leave!" I yelled, and for a moment, I thought I heard the faint sounds of laughter, haunting and childlike, swirling around the room. It was enough to break me. I ran. I sprinted toward the exit, not knowing if my legs would carry me far enough, but I had to escape this place. Just as I flung myself against the door, I stumbled to a halt. It wouldn't budge. Panic surged anew as I clawed at the handle. The whispers escalated, morphing into screams. "You have to understand." And with that, the shadows closed in around me, suffocating and relentless. I could hear their desperate cries echoing in my mind, each note a plea for me to remember. That S when I realized I hadn't escaped them at all. Whatever this was, it wanted me to face the truth. The darkness thickened, pulling closer until I could hardly breathe. My heart pounded as I frantically shoved my shoulder against the door. For a moment, I thought it might give way, but it held fast. I was trapped. Then I remembered the window. With renewed urgency, I darted toward the glass, panic-driven by the echoes of that haunting childlike laughter. I reached for it, but as I did, the glass shimmered like a mirage, refusing to yield. I pounded on it with both fists, desperate for any means of escape. The laughter grew louder, reverberating off the walls. "Why won't you let me go?" I screamed, but the words felt stagnant in the air. The shadows pulsed in response, weaving in and out of the fluorescent glow. The report lay abandoned on the desk, and I caught a glimpse of the familiar names again. Somehow, their mingling presences together weighed heavier than before. As I turned back to face the room, something felt different. I squinted into the darkness, heart racing. A lone figure emerged, its features hidden in shadow. My body froze, dread seizing my every nerve. "Who are you?" I dared to ask, my voice shaking. "Don't you remember?" The figure replied, its voice a whisper filled with haunting familiarity. "You're one of us now." Chills crawled down my spine. I clutched the locket in my pocket tighter, feeling its cool metal against my palm. "Get away from me!" I shouted, backing against the window now. I was desperate. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, brighter this time, and I caught sight of the figure's face. It was someone I had known, someone I had worked with the day of the accident. I stumbled back in disbelief. "No, it can't be. You were there." I was lost," they said softly, a frown crossing their features. "And now, so are you." I blinked, and in that instant, the office morphed into fragments of scattered memories, the sound of sirens blaring, the smell of smoke in the air, the shouts of chaos. It all slammed into me at once. I was not just trapped in a place, I was trapped in a moment. The figure stepped closer, hands outstretched. "You have to help us. We need you to remember." "What do you want me to remember?" I cried, feeling the pressure of their presence crushing in around me. It was suffocating. "I can't help you. I'm not strong enough." "Then you'll forever remain lost," they said, and the shadows surged forth, enveloping the figure. Terrified, I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping the madness would end. But when I opened them, I found myself outside the office, on the street, alone under flickering streetlights. The office stood silent behind me, a dark shell. Shocked and panting, I stumbled away from the building, trying to shake off the terror that clung to me. I thought I had escaped, but then I heard its soft whispers weaving through the night air. "Help us remember." I felt bile rise in my throat. They were still with me. I turned back, facing the office once more. The shadows loomed large, but this time, I knew I couldn't run. I needed answers, and deep down, I knew I had to go back. As my resolve hardened, I took a step toward the building. Then everything went dark. I found myself back in the office, the air thick with an uneasy silence. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, each beat reminding me of the last encounter. I was no longer sure what was real. The whispers had grown louder as I stepped through the threshold, and for a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. I looked around. The room was unchanged, but it felt alive. An electric tension hummed in the air. I remembered the figure, the grief in their eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had come back for answers, but was I really ready to confront my own past? The desk remained cluttered, the report still open, but now it bore fresh marks. Fingerprints? Or smudges of ash? I leaned closer, analyzing the report. The names stared back at me like ghosts, taunting me with their familiarity. Each name tugged at a corner of my memory, aching to be freed. Deciding I needed more than just names, I began to explore. I moved toward the back of the office, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum. I pushed open a door that led to a storage room, filled with forgotten files and dusty boxes. Something caught my eye, an old box stacked haphazardly near the back. It seemed out of place. Curiosity bubbled inside me, strange and compelling. I reached for the box and lifted its lid. Inside, old photographs spilled out, faded snapshots of people I vaguely recognized. There were smiles, laughter, and moments of joy frozen in time, but as I rifled through them, I felt a chill in my bones. Each face seemed to watch me, waiting. Then I stopped cold. One photograph showed a group of us from the office. I was there, beaming, but beside me stood the figure from before the lost one. The memories surged, and suddenly, images of that day flooded back. The accident. The chaos. The moment everything slipped through my fingers. "Remember," I whispered, my throat tightening. But why couldn't I grasp the details? The whispers swirled around me again. "Help us remember." As if responding to my plea, the shadows in the corner of the room shifted. My heart raced, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond my sight. I spun around, searching for whatever was there. "Show yourself!" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. The silence that followed was deafening, and then, in the blink of an eye, I felt the cold grip of fingers brushing against my shoulder. My breath caught in my throat. I whirled around, ready to confront whatever horror awaited me, but the room was empty once more. Just the photos and shadows, but I wasn't alone. I could feel them, the echoes of the lost, the whispers of the tide. They were waiting for something, and deep down, I sensed that they believed I could help them. That S when I saw it. A glimmer beneath a pile of old paperwork. My heart stuttered. I leaned down closer, reaching out to uncover a small object that could change everything. The moment my fingers grasped the locket for the second time, the room began to shift around me. Images flashed before my eyes: children's laughter, the warmth of a summer afternoon, happy times I couldn't quite place. And then, darkness, chaos, and the distant echoes of screams whirling into the cacophony of confusion. I squeezed the locket, clutched it like a lifeline. "Help us," the whispers urged once more, but this time there was urgency in their tone, a need not just to be heard but to be understood. Pressing the locket to my chest, I faltered, teetering on the edge of terror and resolution. I had come back to uncover the truth, but now I was faced with the weight of the past, pressing down like a heavy shroud that I forced myself to focus on the photographs scattered across the desk. My heart raced as I began to connect faces to names. Each one began to unfurl a story, a tale of loss tied to that fateful day. I couldn't remember every detail, but the fear in their eyes and the pull of nostalgia brought me closer to clarity. In the corner of my mind, the pieces clicked together, close yet still frustratingly out of reach. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, a desperate, sputtering warning. I glanced backwards, the shadows danced dangerously close to encroaching upon me. This was their moment. I could feel it. They needed me to piece together the missing fragments, to breathe life into their frozen memories. "Tell me your truth," I whispered, barely hearing my voice through the growing din of voices merging into one. As if in response, the locket flickered with light. I turned it to look closer and saw a familiar face, a face I'd forgotten but had once loved. It was my aunt, someone who always seemed to glide in and out of focus throughout my childhood memories. The realization hit me like a bolt. You were there." I gasped. The locket clattered from my fingers as I stumbled back, lost in a wave of emotions. The whispers turned into cries once more, mounting with crescendo, pleading and desperate. Then I heard a gust of wind tearing through the room, pushing shadows away, revealing a hidden doorway I had never noticed before. It stood ajar, beckoning me. Whatever was waiting beyond that threshold waited for me, gripped by a feeling I couldn't quite articulate. Taking a steadying breath, I stepped forward, crossing the threshold. The dim light sputtered into life around me, illuminating a small room filled with personal items belonging to those lost to time. Each piece held a phantom's memory. I walked between well-worn boxes and faded photographs. One frame caught my eye, a snapshot of my aunt, laughing beside a group of construction workers. I noticed the date etched in the frame, March 14, 1989. What happened that day? I whispered, anguish knotting my stomach. The presence around me pulsed, as if urging me to remember, and then it all came rushing back, shouts of people and loud machinery, a rumble that shook the earth, and the tragedy that stole lives. A safety violation left unaddressed. I'd heard them speak of it, been sheltered from the details by my family. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and I felt a rush of cold air sweep through the space. The atmosphere shifted. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. I was surrounded. An overwhelming dread washed over me, suffocating in its intensity. The walls felt like they were closing in, trapping me with the memories I had tried to evade. Help us, the whispers returned, rising in despair and relentless urgency. The shadows twisted around me, transforming into faces of those lost. They were reaching out, their expressions begging, imploring me to understand. I felt their freedom hang in the balance. I'm sorry, I pleaded, tears swelling in my eyes. I will remember you. At that moment, the whispers calmed, and a light shimmered in the darkness enveloping me. As I steadied myself, it burst forth, illuminating every corner of that room, bright enough to drive away their torment. I could see them clearly now, the lost souls grasping at the truth that had been buried for so long, standing before me, eager to break free, and just like that, the space around me began to dull. The figures slowly faded, smiling with gratitude, little by little dissolving into the air, their burden lifted. I could hear the distant sounds of laughter now, echoing through the corridors of the past, blending with new waves of understanding. Then, without warning, I found myself standing in the main office once more, lost in the hum of machines and the quiet flickers of fluorescent lights. The reports lay meticulously sorted on the desks as if nothing had ever happened. Yet, somewhere deep within me, the weight of their stories remained, entwined with my own. That I peered into the darkness beyond the storage room, its secrets still felt unresolved. What about the figures lost in shadows, trapped in time? I still think about them sometimes, I said softly to myself, the echoes of their voices lingering in the air. I guess I never knew how to let them in. Turning towards the exit, I stepped out into the cool night air, the city alive with the thrumming of life. I knew I had escaped the immediate danger, but with each step forward, I felt a haunting pull. Questions still clung to my frayed consciousness. Who else remained tethered to that fateful day? Would they ever truly find peace? As I walked away, shadows danced behind me, and I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The faintest whispers still flickered in the air as I continued on, leaving some questions forever unanswered.